The night was quiet, and the sky above the small farmhouse was filled with stars. Inside the old wooden house, Daniel sat at his table, sipping the last of his warm milk. He was used to silence, used to the stillness of living far away from the noise of cities. But that night silence felt different, almost alive. He could hear the wind, he could hear the soft ticking of the clock, and then he heard something else. It was a faint sound, like footsteps, but lighter, too soft to belong to a grown man. Daniel froze, listening, his hand gripping the edge of the table. The sound came again, a shuffle, a small breath, and then a knock. 3 gentle taps at the door. His heart quickened. No one ever visited him this late, not in this lonely countryside. Cautiously, he stood and walked toward the door. His hand hesitated on the handle. For a moment he thought about ignoring it, pretending he had heard nothing. But something deep inside told him to open. And when he did, the world he knew changed forever. Standing outside was a girl, small, no taller than his waist. Her skin glowed faintly under the starlight, a pale silver blue. Her hair shimmered like strands of liquid light. Her eyes were wide, too large for her face, glowing faintly with strange colors that shifted as she blinked. Daniel's first thought was that she was lost, maybe in trouble. But his second thought, the one that made his breath catch, was clear. She wasn't human. The girl tilted her head, watching him silently. She looked tired, her small hands clutching something close to her chest. Her lips moved, but the words that came out were broken, a strange mix of sounds he couldn't understand. Daniel stared, his mind racing. He had seen enough news and strange reports to know what she might be. An alien, a child, alone, standing at his door. He should have been afraid, but when her eyes met his, full of exhaustion and something like fear, he felt only one thing: compassion. "Are you hungry?" Daniel asked softly. Of course, she didn't reply. Not with words he understood, but her small body swayed, weak, and he saw how fragile she looked. Without thinking, Daniel stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in," he whispered. She hesitated, then stepped inside, her movements cautious but curious. The air seemed to hum around her, as if her very presence carried energy. Daniel led her to the table, unsure of what to do. "What do you give a lost alien child?" He glanced at the half-empty glass of milk. It was all he had in that moment, something simple, something human. Slowly, he slid the glass across the table toward her. The girl's glowing eyes followed the motion. She tilted her head again, then reached out with thin fingers. She lifted the glass, sniffed it, and for a moment Daniel worried she might not like it. But then she took a sip. Her eyes widened, glowing brighter for an instant, and a sound escaped her lips. Not a word, but a laugh, soft and musical. It filled the room in a way Daniel had never heard before. It was a laugh of surprise, of delight, like she had just discovered something magical. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. The girl set the glass down and pressed both hands against her chest, still giggling in that strange, melodic way. Her laughter was not mocking, it was warm, innocent, full of life. And Daniel, sitting there, couldn't help but smile. A moment ago, he had been alone, just a man with an empty house. Now he was staring at proof that the universe was larger and stranger than he had ever imagined. But deep inside he felt something else. The laugh wasn't just joy, it carried a strange weight, like a hidden meaning. Why did she laugh at milk? Why did she seem so amazed by something so simple? Daniel didn't know. He only knew that her arrival was not an accident, and that laugh was the beginning of something he could not yet understand. Outside, the stars seemed to shine brighter. The night wind whispered through the trees. And inside the farmhouse, a human man and a tiny alien girl sat together, connected by a single glass of milk. Neither of them knew what dangers, what mysteries, and what choices would follow, but both knew one thing: this was only the beginning. Daniel didn't know what he was doing. He had never imagined that one evening He would open his door and find a small alien child standing there. Now she was sitting at his kitchen table, her strange, glowing eyes watching everything with deep curiosity. The half-empty glass of milk still sat in front of her, and every now and then she touched it as though it was something precious. Daniel sat across from her, his mind racing. He wanted to ask her questions, but he knew she couldn't understand his words. Even if she could, would she answer? Could she trust him? He leaned back in his chair, trying to think. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, and the house felt smaller with her inside it, as though his whole world had been shifted. The girl broke the silence. She made a soft humming, noise almost like a song. Her fingers traced patterns on the wooden table, glowing faintly where she touched. Daniel stared, his heart tightening with awe. It wasn't just that she was different. It was that every movement of hers carried a strange beauty, something not of this world. She looked at him then, tilting her head like before. Her large eyes blinked slowly. Daniel tried a smile, gentle and cautious. "Do you have a name?" he asked softly. She tilted her head again, then made a sound, a short, melodic tone. It wasn't a word he could understand, but Daniel decided that was her name. It rolled through the room like music, something alien yet comforting. "All right," he said. "I'll call you Luma." The name felt right. Her eyes brightened, and though he wasn't sure if she understood, she let out a soft laugh. That laugh again, it made the air lighter, as if the weight of silence was broken. But Daniel knew he couldn't ignore the situation. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Where did you come from?" he whispered. Of course there was no answer. The girl simply looked at him, then at the stars visible through the small window. Her gaze lingered there, and Daniel understood without words. She came from beyond, far beyond. For a while they just sat in silence. Daniel poured himself more milk, and when she pointed at the jug, he poured her some too. She sipped carefully, her glowing eyes following his every move. It was strange, sitting with her. It felt like a dream he couldn't wake from, and yet everything was so clear, so real. But soon he noticed how tired she looked. Her eyes drooped, her small shoulders slumped. Daniel realized she was exhausted, probably more than he could imagine. Without a word, he stood and went to the small guest room at the end of the hall. It hadn't been used in years, but he quickly shook the dust from the sheets. He returned and gestured for her to follow. Luma stood slowly, clutching her strange object tightly. She walked with hesitant steps, following him down the hall. When she saw the bed, she froze, staring at it as though it were a puzzle. Daniel gently patted the mattress, showing her it was safe. She blinked, then climbed onto the bed, sitting, cross-legged like a child trying to understand something new. Daniel smiled faintly. "You'll be safe here," he whispered. She tilted her head at his voice, then slowly lay back. Her glowing eyes closed halfway. But before she drifted off, she whispered something. Another melodic sound, soft and gentle. Daniel didn't know what it meant, but he felt warmth in his chest. It was the first time his house had felt alive in years. When she finally slept, Daniel lingered by the door watching. Her breathing was light, her glow dimmer now as though rest had calmed her. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he wasn't alone. But with that feeling came another. Responsibility. Who was she? Why was she here? And more importantly, was she safe here? He stepped outside into the night air. The stars stretched above him, endless and cold. He looked up at them, wondering, if she came from out there, someone might be searching for her, and if someone was searching, were they friendly or dangerous? A shiver ran through him. The wind carried a distant sound, almost like thunder, but deeper. He frowned, scanning the sky. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement among the stars. A flash, a shadow passing. His chest tightened. Was it just his imagination, or was something really out there? When he finally returned inside, he locked the door and sat by the window. The night dragged on, silent but heavy with questions. In the other room, Luma slept peacefully, unaware of the fear that gnawed at Daniel's mind. He kept watch, his eyes scanning the sky. Something told him this was not a simple chance meeting. The universe had brought her to his door for a reason, and before long, Daniel would find out what that reason was. But for now, he sat alone, guarding a tiny alien child who had laughed at a glass of milk. The first night had only just begun. The morning light slipped through the old curtains of Daniel's farmhouse. For a moment, it felt like any ordinary day. The smell of earth and wood around him, the faint sound of birds outside. But when he stepped into the hallway and looked toward the guest room, he remembered, this was not an ordinary morning. Inside, on the bed, lay the tiny alien girl, Luma, still fast asleep, her faint glow shimmering like morning dew on grass. Daniel stood there for a while, watching her breathe. She looked peaceful, innocent, almost like a normal child. If one ignored the shimmering skin and glowing eyes, he rubbed the back of his neck, unsure of what to do. How do you care for someone not from this world? He made breakfast, simple toast and eggs. But when the smell filled the house, Luma stirred, her large eyes blinking open slowly. She sat up, clutching the strange object in her arms, and looked around. When her gaze found Daniel, she smiled, faintly as though she already trusted him. That smile warmed his chest, surprising him with how much it meant. "Morning," Daniel said, though he knew she didn't understand. Still, he placed a plate in front of her and sat down with his own. She poked at the food, curious, then sniffed, just like she had with the milk. Carefully, she took a bite, and to Daniel's relief, she ate it. Not only ate, it looked like she enjoyed it, her glowing eyes flashing with delight as she chewed. And again, a small laugh escaped her lips, light and musical. Daniel found himself laughing too, though he didn't know why. For a moment it felt normal. Two people sharing breakfast at a table, but deep inside, Daniel couldn't shake the weight of what had happened last night. He remembered the sound outside, the flash in the sky. Something told him Luma hadn't come here by accident. Something, or someone, was out there, and it might not be friendly. After breakfast, Luma wandered around the house. She touched everything, curious about the smallest objects, an old book, a cracked lamp, the ticking clock. When she tapped the clock with her finger, Daniel noticed the hands stutter, as though her touch interfered with it. He frowned but said nothing. It was clear her presence carried strange energy. Later, he stepped outside to gather firewood. Luma followed, walking barefoot across the grass. The morning sun reflected off her silver-blue skin, making her glow even brighter. She tilted her head back, staring at the sky. Daniel followed her gaze and froze. High above, faint but clear, 3 lines of light cut across the sky, moving too steady and too fast to be shooting stars. His chest tightened. They weren't natural. He glanced at Luma. Her expression had changed. Her glowing eyes widened, and for the first time Daniel saw fear in them. She hugged her strange object tighter and stepped closer to him, as if seeking protection. Daniel's mind raced. If those lights were ships, then someone was searching. And if Luma was hiding, that meant whoever was searching might not have good intentions. He crouched down, meeting her gaze. "Are they looking for you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer with words, but her trembling hands told him enough. She was afraid, deeply afraid. Daniel's protective instincts surged. He had no idea what he was up against. No idea what those lights in the sky were capable of, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let them take her, not when she had come to him, not when she had laughed at milk and smiled at him as though he was safe. The rest of the day passed in unease. Daniel kept glancing at the horizon, half expecting to see strange figures approaching his land, but the sky remained still. Luma stayed close to him, exploring less now, as though she too sensed the danger. As night fell, the silence grew heavier. Daniel sat by the window with a lantern, watching the stars. Luma sat nearby, her small frame, curled up, holding her object close. At one point she looked at him, then at the window. She whispered a word. Soft, melodic, filled with meaning he couldn't grasp. But when she said it, Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know the language, but his heart understood. Danger. Hours later, as the farmhouse slept in uneasy silence, Daniel awoke to a sound. It wasn't the knock of last night. It was a hum, low and steady, vibrating through the walls. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped. Outside, the sky above was no longer still. A faint circular glow pulsed behind the clouds, moving slowly. Something was searching, sweeping the land below. Daniel's pulse raced. He turned back to the house. Luma stood at the door, her glowing eyes wide. She raised her hand, pointing to the sky, then shook her head fiercely, as though warning him. The hum grew louder. Daniel's jaw tightened. Whatever was up there, it was looking for her, and it was getting closer. And in that moment, he knew one thing with certainty. His quiet life was over. The night of stars and silence had ended the moment he gave a tiny alien girl a glass of milk. Now, the real story was about to begin. The night air trembled with the strange hum. Daniel stood frozen in the yard, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. Above the clouds, the glow moved slowly, sweeping across the countryside like an invisible spotlight. It was steady, controlled, not the randomness of lightning or weather. It was searching. At the doorway, Luma clutched the frame tightly, her glowing eyes fixed on the sky. Her lips moved in soft whispers like a prayer. Daniel glanced at her, his chest tightening. This wasn't some wild imagination. Something real was happening, and it was dangerous. Inside, he whispered, sharply, motioning her back. She hesitated, then darted in, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Daniel followed, shutting the door with trembling hands. He killed the lantern, leaving only darkness. The hum outside grew louder, pulsing, like a heartbeat. Daniel crouched by the window, peeking through the curtain. He saw nothing but the faint shifting light in the clouds. Still, he felt the presence heavy and suffocating. Beside him, Luma crouched too, holding her strange object against her chest. Her glowing eyes dimmed, as if she were trying to hide. Her light, Daniel noticed and realized she was used to hiding, used to being hunted. The thought filled him with anger. What kind of beings would chase a child across the stars? The hum faded after a while, drifting into silence. Daniel's shoulders eased, though his heartbeat still pounded. He turned to Luma, who looked at him with fearful eyes. "We can't stay here forever," he muttered under his breath. She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. She nodded slightly, her tiny hands trembling. Morning came slowly, gray and heavy. Daniel hadn't slept at all. He kept watch by the window while Luma rested on the couch, curled up beneath a blanket that looked too big for her small frame. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind made him tense. When the sun finally rose, it brought little comfort. After breakfast, Daniel packed a small bag. He stuffed in food, water, and an old map. Luma watched him silently, tilting her head as though trying to guess his plan. "We're leaving," he said, his voice firm. "I don't know who's out there, but they're not finding you here." She hugged her strange object tighter, then slowly nodded. Her trust in him was unspoken but clear. It startled Daniel. How much responsibility he felt in that moment. He had no idea how to protect her from ships in the sky, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting anyone take her. They set out just after noon, walking across the fields behind the farmhouse. Daniel knew the land well. He had grown up here. There were old trails that led deep into the forest, places where even planes above couldn't see clearly. That was where he planned to go, at least until he figured out what to do. The forest welcomed them with shade and silence. Luma moved carefully, her small feet barely making a sound. Every now and then she stopped to touch the bark of a tree, or to watch a bird flutter past. Despite the danger, her curiosity remained, and Daniel realized she was still just a child in so many ways. They walked for hours. Daniel guided them deeper into the woods, past streams and rocky paths. The deeper they went, the more secure he felt. But his relief didn't last. By evening, a low hum echoed again, distant but real. Daniel froze, looking. Up through the trees there. Beyond the branches, faint lights drifted across the sky, slower this time, deliberate. They were scanning, sweeping like hunters. Luma's glow dimmed instantly. She pressed close to Daniel, whispering her melodic words in fear. Daniel crouched beside her, pressing a finger to his lips. "Shh," he murmured, though his own fear was growing. The lights passed overhead, their glow bleeding through the canopy. The hum vibrated through the ground, through Daniel's bones. He held his breath, gripping Luma's small hand tightly. For a long, tense minute, they stayed hidden. Then, slowly, the sound faded again, drifting toward the horizon. Daniel exhaled, realizing his palms were sweaty. He looked at Luma. Her wide eyes were fixed on him. She trusted him, completely. And that trust was heavier than any weight he had ever carried. As night fell, Daniel found an old hunter's cabin, abandoned long ago. The roof sagged, the windows were broken, but it was shelter. They stepped inside, and Daniel cleared a space for them. Luma curled up against the wall, clutching her object close. Daniel lit a small fire, careful to keep it low. He sat beside her, watching the flames flicker. "Who are they?" he whispered, almost to himself. "Why are they after you?" Luma stirred, her glowing eyes meeting his. She lifted the strange object in her hands and pressed it to her chest. Then she extended it toward him, as though offering to share its secret. Daniel leaned forward, breath catching. The object glowed, faintly in her small hands, humming softly. It wasn't just a toy or something she carried for comfort. It was alive, pulsing with energy. Before Daniel could react, Luma whispered a word. Soft, melodic, unlike anything he'd heard before. The object pulsed brighter, and for a brief second Daniel saw images flash through his mind. A sky filled with burning ships, a planet crumbling, voices crying out, and Luma running, fleeing, carrying this very object. Daniel gasped, pulling back. The glow faded, leaving only silence. Luma looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. In that moment, Daniel understood. This child wasn't just lost, she was a survivor, carrying something others wanted badly. Outside, the forest was quiet, but Daniel knew the silence wouldn't last. They were searching, and sooner or later they would find her. And when they did, he would have to stand between them and her, no matter the cost. The night in the old cabin was heavy. Daniel sat awake while Luma slept beside the fire, her small frame curled around the glowing object. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, the images he had seen flashed in his mind, burning skies, falling ships, and the cries of people he couldn't understand. It wasn't just her he was protecting. It was something far bigger, something powerful. The forest outside was quiet, but Daniel's instincts screamed danger. He had hunted deer in these woods. He knew the silence of night. This silence was different, too still, too waiting. Hours passed, and then he heard it. A faint crack of branches, too steady to be the wind. Daniel tensed, reaching for the old hunting rifle he had carried with him. He hadn't fired it in years, but his hands still remembered the weight. Slowly, he crouched by the window, peering into the dark trees. Shapes moved there, faint but real. 3 figures, tall and lean, their bodies glowing faintly in the shadows. They were not human. Their armor shimmered like liquid metal, and in their hands long spear-like weapons pulsed with energy. Hunters, Daniel's heart hammered. They were here for her, no doubt. And if they found her, he had no illusions. They wouldn't ask politely. They would take her, and maybe kill him, for standing in their way. He turned to Luma, who was now awake, her glowing eyes wide with fear. She had felt them too. She whispered something, clinging to the object tightly. Daniel crouched beside her, pressing a finger to his lips. "Quiet," he whispered. She nodded, though her small hands trembled. The hunters moved closer. Their steps were silent, but Daniel could hear the faint hum of their weapons. They stopped outside the cabin, their glowing eyes scanning the dark. Daniel's breath caught. This was it. The moment he had feared, one of the hunters stepped forward and placed a hand on the wall. The wood glowed faintly where he touched, as if reacting to his presence. Daniel knew they would come inside soon. He had seconds to act. He leaned close to Luma. "You have to hide," he whispered, pointing to a small space beneath the floorboards where he had seen old storage once. She shook her head fiercely, whispering something desperate, but Daniel didn't give her a choice. He pulled up the boards and motioned again, his eyes firm. "Hide," he said. This time she obeyed, crawling into the space with her glowing object clutched tight. Daniel replaced the boards just as the cabin door creaked open. The hunters entered, their tall frames filling the doorway. Their eyes glowed, scanning, their weapons humming with quiet menace. Daniel stood in the center of the room, rifle in hand, heart pounding. He tried to steady his breath, though fear clawed at his chest. One of the hunters stepped closer, tilting. Its head, it spoke, its voice a low, metallic growl. The words were alien, but Daniel understood the meaning. They were asking where she was. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle. "She's not here," he said firmly, though he knew they couldn't understand. The hunter tilted its head again, then moved closer. Daniel raised the rifle. "Stay back," he growled. The room grew tense. For a moment, no one moved. Then the hunter lunged forward with lightning speed. Daniel fired, the sound of the rifle exploding in the cabin. The shot struck the hunter in the chest, sending it stumbling back, but it didn't fall. It roared, its armor glowing brighter. The others surged forward, weapons raised. Daniel dove behind the table as a blast of energy ripped through the wall, splinters flying. His heart raced. He fired again, the shot striking another in the shoulder, making it real. But there were 3 of them, and only one of him, beneath the floorboards. Luma pressed her hands against her mouth to keep from crying out. Her glowing eyes brimmed with fear, but also something else, resolve. The object in her hands pulsed brighter, humming louder. She closed her eyes and whispered, words in her strange tongue. In the cabin above, Daniel was running out of options. The hunters pressed closer, their weapons humming louder. Then, suddenly, the floor beneath him glowed. A wave of light burst upward, knocking the hunters back. Daniel stumbled, shielding. His eyes from the floor. Luma rose, floating slightly, her small frame surrounded by a glowing aura. The object in her hands shone like a star, humming with power. The hunters froze, their glowing eyes wide. One of them hissed, stepping back as if in fear. Daniel stared in shock. Luma's voice filled the cabin, melodic and powerful. The object pulsed with each word, sending waves of energy through the air. The hunters backed, toward the door, their confidence shaken. They looked at one another, then turned and vanished into the night. The hum of their weapons faded into silence. The cabin was still again, the only sound Luma's quiet breathing. Her glow dimmed, and she collapsed into Daniel's arms. He caught her, heart racing. He looked at the object, still faintly glowing in her hands. It wasn't just powerful, it was dangerous. And now, whoever those hunters served would know exactly where she was. Daniel held her close, his jaw tight. He had survived tonight, but this was only the beginning. The real fight was coming. The cabin smelled of smoke and dust. Daniel sat on the floor with Luma in his arms, her small body limp from exhaustion. The glow that had terrified the hunters was fading, leaving her looking fragile again. Her strange object pulsed faintly, like a tired heartbeat. Daniel's hand shook as he brushed her silver blue hair away from her face. She opened her glowing eyes halfway, weak but alive. "You did good," Daniel whispered, even though she couldn't understand. She blinked slowly, her tiny fingers tightening around his shirt as if asking him not to let go. The cabin walls were scarred, blackened from the hunters' weapons. Daniel knew they would come back. If those 3 had failed, more would follow. The cabin was no longer safe. At dawn, he gathered what little he had, a few supplies from his bag, his rifle, and some food. He wrapped Luma in a blanket and carried her on his back. She was light, lighter than a normal child, as though her bones weren't quite like human ones. Her head rested against his shoulder, her strange object clutched close. They left the cabin behind and moved deeper into the forest. Daniel followed. Game trails, narrow paths hidden under the trees. The forest was quiet, but he knew the silence wouldn't last. The hunters would be tracking them, and this time they wouldn't hesitate. By midday, Daniel reached the edge of a river. The water rushed quickly, carrying foam and broken branches. He crouched, lowering Luma to the ground. She stirred, opening her eyes. Her gaze fell on the river and she whispered something. Her words were soft, melodic, but Daniel didn't understand. She touched the water with her fingers, and for a moment the rushing current calmed around her touch. Daniel stared, breath caught. Even in weakness, she carried power. They followed the river downstream, hoping the noise of water would cover their tracks. Daniel's boots splashed in the shallow edges, but Luma walked lightly, barely leaving ripples. For a moment, Daniel almost forgot the danger. It felt strange, peaceful, like they were simply walking together, two companions on a journey. But peace never lasted long. The sound reached him first. A low hum, distant but growing. Daniel's chest tightened. He grabbed Luma's hand, pulling her close. The hum grew louder, echoing through the trees. Then he saw it. Above the canopy, a sleek dark shape moved, gliding silently, its underside glowing faintly. A ship. Daniel's heart pounded. "They're here," he muttered, pulling Luma into the cover of the trees. The ship hovered, scanning the river. Beams of pale light. Cutting across the water, Daniel crouched low, his hand over Luma's small head. Keeping her close, he held his breath, praying the light wouldn't touch them. The ship lingered, then drifted farther downstream. Daniel exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. But Luma's eyes were wide with fear. She knew they wouldn't give up. And Daniel knew it too. By nightfall, they reached a cave hidden by moss and rocks. Daniel decided they would rest here, inside. The air was cool and damp, the stone walls rough under his hands. He set Luma down gently, giving her some food and water. She ate quietly, her glowing eyes fixed on him. At one point she reached out, placing her small hand over his. Her touch was warm, gentle, filled with trust. Daniel swallowed hard. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was beginning to care for her like family, but he also knew caring meant danger. He was only human, and the hunters had weapons and ships. How long could he keep her safe? That night, as they rested, the hum returned, faint at first, then stronger. Daniel froze, listening. It wasn't just one. There were many, ships moving together, circling, closing in. Luma sat up, clutching her glowing object tightly, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered a single word, urgent. Desperate, Daniel didn't understand, but he felt its meaning. Run. Without another thought, Daniel grabbed his rifle and lifted her into his arms. They sprinted from the cave, branches tearing at his clothes as he ran through the forest. The hum grew louder, beams of light cutting through the trees, searching, sweeping closer. Daniel's breath burned in his chest, but he didn't stop. He could hear the hunters now. Voices, metallic and sharp, echoing through the night. They were near. He slid down a slope, mud and roots under his boots, clutching Luma close. A blast of energy struck the tree above them, exploding in sparks. Daniel fell, rolling across the ground, pain shooting through his arm, but he held onto Luma, never letting her go. Another blast cut past them, searing the air. Daniel fired back blindly, the rifle cracking in the night. The shot echoed, but he didn't wait to see if it hit. He ran, heart pounding. Luma pressed against him, whispering rapidly in her melodic tongue. The object in her hands glowed brighter, pulsing faster. Daniel didn't know what she was doing, but suddenly the air shimmered around them. The forest seemed to bend, the trees glowing faintly. Then, silence. The hunters' voices faded, the hum of ships dulled. Daniel stumbled, gasping. It was as if the world around them had shifted. He looked at Luma. Her glow was faint, her face pale with exhaustion. She had done something to hide them, but it had cost her strength. Daniel held her tighter, his mind reeling. He had no idea how long her power could shield them, but one thing was certain. They were no longer running just from hunters. They were running from an entire force that would never stop. And Daniel had only one choice left. He would fight for her no matter the odds. The forest was quiet again, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. Luma had shielded them with her strange power, bending the world around them, hiding them from the hunters. But he could see how weak she had become, her silver-blue skin pale, her glowing eyes half-closed. She leaned against him, clutching the object that pulsed faintly like a dying flame. Daniel sat on a fallen log, heart pounding. He stared into the darkness, knowing the silence was temporary. "They'll find us again," he muttered. Luma didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. She pressed her small hand over his chest, right where his heart beat. Her eyes glowed faintly as if to say, "Don't give up." Daniel swallowed hard. He had never been a hero. He was just a farmer, a man who wanted peace and quiet. But now, fate had placed an alien child in his care, and the universe was demanding he fight for her. The night dragged on, heavy and tense. Then the sound came. A low, rising hum, louder than before. Daniel's stomach twisted. This time, it wasn't one ship. It was many. Lights cut across the sky, beams sweeping through the trees like giant searchlights. The ground vibrated under his boots. The hunters had returned in force. Daniel stood, rifle in hand. He looked down at Luma, who sat trembling but ready, her glowing object tight in her grip. "No more running," Daniel said softly. His voice was steady, almost calm. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me." The first hunters appeared, stepping from the shadows between the trees, tall, armored figures with glowing eyes and humming weapons, 3, then 5, then more, surrounding them in a wide circle. Daniel's pulse raced, but he didn't back down. He raised his rifle, aiming at the nearest one. "Stay behind me," he muttered to Luma. The hunters advanced, weapons glowing brighter. One of them barked in its metallic tongue, pointing its spear-like weapon toward Luma. Daniel's jaw tightened. He fired, the rifle cracked, the bullet striking the hunter's chest and staggering it backward. The others roared, rushing forward. Energy blasts ripped through the air, burning the ground where Daniel had stood seconds before he dove behind a tree, returning fire. The night erupted with chaos, wood splintering, light flashing, the forest alive with battle. Daniel gritted his teeth, firing again and again. He wasn't a soldier, but he fought like a man with nothing to lose. Every shot was for her, the little alien girl who had laughed at Milk and trusted him. Luma crouched behind the log, her hands shaking. The object in her arms pulsed, brighter and brighter. She whispered in her melodic language, faster now, desperate. The glow spread from the object into her body, surrounding her in a faint aura. She stood small but defiant, her voice rising. The hunters froze for a moment, startled. Daniel saw it, her glow pushing against them, forcing them back. But the hunters pressed harder, their weapons humming louder, tearing through the light. Daniel ran forward, firing point blank at one. Knocking it down, he swung the rifle like a club at another, his strength fueled by pure fury. Pain seared his arm as an energy blast grazed him. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Luma cried out, her voice rising higher. The object in her hands flared like a star, blinding the forest with pure light. The hunters staggered, covering their eyes. Daniel shielded his face, teeth clenched against the brightness, and then, in the heart of the light, he saw images, not just of destruction this time, but of hope, worlds rebuilding, people surviving. And in all of it, one figure stood, a human, holding out a hand to an alien child, offering kindness instead of fear. The vision faded, the light exploded outward, a shock wave that knocked the hunters sprawling, their weapons flickered and died, their glowing armor dimming. One by one they fell back into the shadows, retreating into the night. The hum of ships above wavered, then vanished. The forest grew still again. Daniel collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. His rifle lay broken at his side, but when he looked up he saw Luma still standing, her small body glowing faintly, her eyes bright with tears. She stumbled forward, falling into his arms. Daniel held her tightly, his heart pounding with relief. It's over, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it truly was. But for now the hunters were gone. The night was theirs. Luma pressed the glowing object into his hands. Daniel stared, confused. But she looked at him with steady eyes, whispering softly. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was trusting him with it, with her future, with everything. Daniel closed his fingers around the object. It felt warm, alive, like it recognized him. He met her glowing eyes and nodded. "I'll protect you," he said. "No matter what comes." The stars above shone brighter. The forest whispered with wind. And in that quiet moment, Daniel realized his life would never be the same. He had given a tiny alien girl a glass of milk, and in return she had given him something far greater. A purpose, a bond, a reason to fight. The hunters would come again, he knew. The universe would not forget. But he also knew something they didn't. Humans did not give up. Not when someone needed them, and he was ready.